Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, June 18th Board of Selectmen meeting, the McAuliffe Hearing Room. All selectmen are present. First, public comment. Seeing none. We'll move to our scheduled appointments. First, 6:30 p.m. hearing, underground storage tank license application, Mr. Loda, 13 Windermere Drive. There is a note, so I'll open the public hearing and read the notice that was submitted to the abutters. Southborough Board of Selectmen shall hold a public hearing on Tuesday, June 18th, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. in the McAuliffe Hearing Room at the Southborough Townhouse, 17 Common Street, Southborough, Mass. To consider an application from Salim Loda III for a license to store LP gas, propane, up to 1,000 gallons in underground tanks to be located at 13 Windermere Drive, Southborough, Mass. All interested parties are encouraged to attend. Pass that to Lisa, please. Mr. Loda is not here right now. I know the application has been submitted to the fire department, has been reviewed by the fire department as well. Chief Achilles, if you could just mention a word or two in your review of the application, please.
Thank you. I know this came up, started once before, and there was some misunderstanding on the type of application and the amount. So I went out in the last couple of weeks to that residence and did a site review, spoke with a resident, and it seems it meets the code, there's enough setbacks, it's an appropriate use of the underground tanks, and I felt very comfortable that it would be appropriate and should go forward.
Great. Thank you. Any board members with questions or comments?
None here.
Nope. Is there anybody from the public with questions or comments? Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of closing the public hearing? Motion passes unanimously. With that, all those in favor of approving the underground storage tank license for Mr. Loda, I will make that motion. Is there a second for
Second.
that? That's moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Next appointment, Eagle Scout Project, Zane Walter. If you could come on up. Welcome to our meeting, and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. So my name is Zane. I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm going to be a senior next year. I'm 17. So my project is it's going to be like a trailhead kiosk and parking spaces where Route 30 and Old Northborough Road meet. So right there, this is a satellite view. I've marked there where the gate is, so we're going to put the kiosk just to the left of that, and then some parking spaces are going to be going there. We're going to be clearing the brush there for where the parking will be, and then we're going to be constructing a kiosk not unlike that one, and then installing it and installing posts to mark the parking spaces. So it will connect the three trails and allow hikers to park at the trailhead while still allowing its use for Chestnut Hill Farm, and will further promote the use of the trails. We already have approval from the police, DPW, trustees. We've got positive response from the Open Land Foundation and the Sudbury Reservoir Trail. We just need approval from Board of Selectmen, Troop Committee, and Scout Council. That's
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much for the presentation. I don't have any questions. It was a very good presentation. It seems like a very worthwhile project as well, and I look forward to utilizing the trails. And I'll open up to any questions or comments that the board has. Ms. Braccio.
Good evening. Thank you for coming, and thank you for spearheading this project. That's a great area to walk over there, so it's appreciated. Just one quick question for you. How many parking spots are you anticipating having put there?
I think we were looking at about we could fit like 3 or 4
Okay,
across.
that's perfect. Thank you, and again, great job on the presentation.
Thank you.
So, yes, outstanding job, and thank you for proposing it. What was the impetus for doing this particular project? What made you think of it?
I like hiking and I like the trails, and so I went to the Trails Committee to see what project ideas they had, and that was one of them that I thought, it's close by, I know the area, and I would like to, make something for it.
So I think it's a great idea. I had some discussions with members of the Trails Committee, who I think do wonderful work for the town. And one of the biggest things is knowing where the trails are. And so, who would know? Would people really know that there are trails connected, there? Probably not. So I think this kiosk will go a long ways to making sure that these trails, which people spend time and money putting together, producing, maintaining, will be used by more residents. So I think it's a great idea. And for those that haven't done it yet, take a look at the Trails Committee website. There's an amazing, I think it's up now, but there's an amazing video that was produced by the Trails Committee about all the trails in Southborough. So this is clearly going to enhance that. Well done, young man. I look forward to supporting it.
Thank you.
Mr. Stivers.
Thank you. Nice presentation, good project. The signage there in the kiosk, is that something that is part of the project, or will the Trails Committee then work to put maps in there and other signage to inform people about trail structure?
I believe the Trails Committee are providing the map that will go in there, and I also am looking at putting some historical information that I might be able to find in there as well.
Good. Good project. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to echo everybody else. It was a terrific presentation, and I'll let you know that we had a discussion, Selectwoman Braccio and I, last week with one of the co-chairs of the Trails Committee, and your impact is not going to be just on this particular kiosk. They are using it as a jumping-off point for doing these sort of kiosks at a number of locations, following up on Mr. Calenda's point. And I think not only are you going to have a terrific kiosk at that location, but it's going to be the impetus for really tying these trails together. So, well done.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Just a motion that we vote to approve the project as presented.
Is there a second? Second. Motion made, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Passes unanimously.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
coming.
Oh, I'm sorry. Catherine, I should have gone to you before that, so.
Thank you. I'm Catherine McKee with Trails Committee. Sorry I'm late. So we fully support Zane, obviously, but I wanted just to say, I'm going to take a minute for a minute.
Take your time.
I just came, I lost
One
my
of the
keys.
trails?
Sort of. It's been a trek.
Yeah.
So we just had a quick update on the other Eagle Scout, Eric Hansen. His project has slightly changed. So he's going to still do the kiosk at Route 30 and Framingham Road. But he's going to not do the parking lot because the chief mentioned, after the recommendation of the board, to check with the police to make sure it was safe. The chief recommended that we don't sanction the area for parking because of the complexities of the intersection. So in lieu of a parking lot, to make it a viable Eagle Scout project, he's proposing doing multiple trailheads. So he's going to build several kiosks. And I just wanted to update the committee or the board and let you know that that's the direction we were going to go. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you for the update.
Thanks.
Next appointment, Chief Achilles, proposal for new ambulance fees.
Just gonna get this up for you. find the thing, here it is. Again, thank you. When I was appointed fire chief, one of my tasks that I thought was very important was to assess one of, and a very important part of the department, which is our ambulance service, and specifically the revenue. In my previous employer, I was very well-versed with the company that we use as an ambulance billing company, Comstar. And I think it was incumbent upon me to know how well were we doing in putting out bills, collecting bills, what was our revenue stream, and if there were any weaknesses or opportunities in our ambulance billing process. So after meeting with members of my staff and a representative from Comstar, it was pretty evident that it was important for me to come before this board and look at revising our ambulance billing rates. And I think this presentation, which you also have, will kind of explain why. And my recommendations are included in this presentation. And I would look for any feedback you have or any questions you have on this. But I'm before you tonight because I think this is very important, and it would be appropriate for us to consider this. So I'll start off with in ambulance billing, and this town has billed for ambulance service for some time. I think it's important for people to realize, much like water and sewer and other utilities, that that the taxpayers pay for the coverage and service availability. But it's the user that pays for the actual medical care and transport. And that's why we have an opportunity to get revenue from the ambulance service so that it does not cover full of our operational costs, but it's a pretty important part of offsetting the cost of the service to the community, and it doesn't bear it on the whole tax base, but a lot on the user. So much like the water system or water sewer. So I think people need to realize or understand that. One area that we looked at is we do about 567 transports a year, which you'll see come up. That's not responses, and we do not bill for responses that we don't physically transport to a facility. Out of that 567, there is a percentage that is approximately about 516 of that. It's about 579, 567, that have insurance. And that insurance is Medicare, Medicaid. We have some bigger providers that some of you might actually have, and then there's other insurance providers. 42% of our people that have insurance have a private insurance, and 43% have Medicare, and 15% have Medicaid. And this will come up later, but with people that have insurance, and I was astounded, we have a 95.8% collection rate. So that leads me, as our discussion goes forward, we're doing all the right things and getting all the right information in the right time to collect on our charges for ambulance service. If this was much lower, I wouldn't be talking about raising the rates. There is another percentage of people that either have self-paid or self-insured, and as you can understand, that's a lot harder to collect. And about 11% of our responses are self-paid or self-insured, and our collection rate's about 17.6%. And that will, again, you'll see where we'll do with that and my thoughts on that. So in a year, we do about, and this was last year, we did about 567 total transports. Now, we have billing rates that have been adopted, and we billed out a total of $854,000, which sounds like a lot. But each insurance has an allowable, and Medicare has a certain allowable that's way below market. In Medicaid, there's a set fee that we get reimbursed. So you can see where, even though we bill it out, the allowable bills is significantly less. But that's the number we start working with. And that's where we get that collected rate. So the ambulance service brought in $390,000 last year. So the overall collection rate, even though we have good on our insurance providers and people have insurance and not so well with self-insured, we're about 80%. And that, to me, is a pretty good rate. I've tracked it in previous organizations, and we would be between 70 and 75. So this is a very good rate. And it also supports the idea of where could we, what opportunities do we have to increase the revenue? So everybody's aware, I think for the public and for also the board members, that if somebody is transported by a Southborough ambulance, there is a patient care report that we complete that includes insurance information and all the different skills we do. And you'll see later on the different categories of that skill set. We make sure we complete that. And the idea is that with any billing, you want to get this done as early as possible and complete as possible. It gets picked up by our private insurance billing agency, Comstar, and they verify that in the ambulance report what we did as far as what's allowable for billing, and that we have insurance information. Then they electronically submit the claims to the insurance carriers, and there's deductibles in this, which some of you are aware of when if you have insurance, and certain allowable rates that are allowed by Medicare, Medicaid, and other insurance carriers. And we will bill that insurance carrier for that amount. We are required to balance bill, so if insurance covers $100 of a $150 bill, we are obligated to bill the extra $50. And some people have supplemental insurance, some people will cover that. If somebody does not have insurance, they would get the actual bill. And you can see why that would be hard if you don't have insurance, why our collection rates would be off a little bit. On the right side of this screen, you see some of the things that we do in attempt to collect. And the practice that I would continue to support, that you would get 3 bills, and they're spaced out in 30, 60, 90 days. If we don't get any response, our billing company sends that person a hardship request. If somebody's having a difficult time paying a bill, has no insurance, we welcome people looking for an abatement. You don't get a lot of choice asking for the ambulance, so the thought is if you can't pay, you shouldn't have to pay. But if you have the ability to pay and you have insurance, you should pay. If there's still no response, we send out a collection letter, or the billing company sends one out on our behalf saying, Southborough Fire Department, you have a bill. But I will tell you that we don't send anybody to do any credit bureau reporting. Again, I don't think that's a good practice where you don't have a lot of choice. And we give everybody an abatement opportunity. So there are some areas that we can improve our collection rate based on this practice, which I'll talk about in the end. But I just want everybody to know that if you have the ability to pay, you should pay if you have insurance or financially able to. If you're not, then we want you to look for an abatement or request a hardship, and then we can review that and help people out. And we don't send people to the credit bureau that your credit report goes off because you didn't pay your ambulance bill. So currently, our charges that were last updated in 2014, there was a mileage revision in 2016, but in 2014, these were the rates that were identified and adopted. I want to explain this just a little bit. because will help with what I'm recommending. Medicare allows a certain amount. And you see that down that column, that the primary types of emergencies, transports we bill for are BLS emergency, ALS 1 emergency, ALS 2 emergency, and we're allowed to bill for mileage. The difference between BLS, ALS 1, ALS 2 is really the skill set and the level of care that we have to provide. And it would make more sense that a chest pain or somebody having a heart attack would have more skills and procedures performed on them than somebody that had a cut finger. So that's kind of how that works out. Medicare allowed, and this is even makes it more interesting, is we're allowed to, we get 80% of that allowable rate. So you can see that Medicare is probably the largest portion of the people that utilize the ambulance, but the reimbursement for that, the services that we provide are very low. But across the country, across Massachusetts, in my previous, you accept what Medicare does. And I don't want to say it's a guaranteed pay, but it's what people have for insurance, and it's appropriate. The next column is what we asked ComStar, and they provide what the average top 50 of their clients, about 99% are in Massachusetts, what are their billing rates? I just want to add that I can't give you the billing rates, or they won't provide it for each town, because competitively, if somebody's a private ambulance service or another agency wants to compete with them, these are numbers, I mean, they could find them, but ComStar is they have clients, they don't give out the rates. Our current rates are listed in that column, and you can see BLS emergency is about 1,000, ALS 1 emergency is about 1,500, ALS 2 emergency is about 2,200, and we charge $20 for mileage, and that's from the incident scene of the residence to the hospital. You can see there's a significant difference between the going rates, or what would be acceptable billing rates in our area versus what we charge. And my experience is that you would like to review your rates every year, and typically once a year you try to adjust them appropriately. We're 4 years, almost 5 years behind, or 5 years behind. So this is why I'm coming to you now. I think there's an opportunity that we should to look at this. Our proposed ambulance rates, BLS emergency, ALS 1, ALS 2, after reviewing and talking to some of my peers in municipal ambulance service providers and fire departments in the area, I think the average top 50 rates, because it's a cross-section of the Commonwealth and southern New Hampshire, would be appropriate rates for us. So I'm requesting that our new rates reflect what is customarily charged throughout our region. And why I put the percentage of transports up here is that because our collection rate for people that are insured is very high, and that a lot of our transports are at a higher rate, I think there would be an appropriate revenue, positive revenue stream if we implemented this. And I think that's important as we look at the services we provide, as a new chief, some of the initiatives I'm thinking about for the department over the next couple of years, and how do we lessen that burden on the taxpayers as a whole by appropriately finding a revenue source that's acceptable, that's reasonable, and is appropriate for what we do. So that's one area, and we'll go back to the rates when you're to discuss if you'd like. But I just wanted to add additional opportunities. Some of the opportunities that our billing company had suggested in areas that we've already started implementing in the last 2 weeks was a lot of self-insured or not insured, because we have 495 in the Mass Pike and Route 9, auto insurance is an opportunity for us to seek reimbursement or payment from the automobile insurance that a patient has as a primary source. There's limited funds in that, but if you can submit that early in the process, I think that will start to cover some of our collection rate on our self-insured and non-insured. And we've just started implementing this. Other things that we've done internally is just make sure we have the correct address. It sounds weird, but we would always pick somebody up at their home address. And if you just think if we just put their incident address like Wendy's, the bill's gonna go to Wendy's. So, for Mr. Smith. So we wanna make sure that the billing information is correct, and we're looking at that. Also, I have had experience in a previous employer, and I know some other municipal fire departments do this, is seek opportunities that, for those people that have the opportunity to pay that choose not to, is go to a third-party collection. So, after 180 days, if somebody still has not chosen to pay, submit it to their insurance carrier, or request a hardship, we would have the ability to say, okay, we're gonna send that to a collection agency. Again, it does not reflect on your credit report, but that may also, two things. One, prompt somebody that may have gotten the check from their insurance company, sent directly to them, to mail it to us or submit it. It may, again, prompt them to say, I can't pay, I'm requesting a hardship, which then we can review. Or, if they do nothing, hopefully we get some level of reimbursement, maybe not the full amount, but some level of reimbursement. And there's one locally, our billing agency has recommendations, but if we were to implement that, I would start looking at a process so people don't think they're just going to a collection off the bat. But I think I wouldn't be before you if I didn't think our collections rates were appropriate, if there was other areas that we needed to fix. And if our rates have been continually revised and reflected the current market, but we're substantially behind. So I will welcome any questions on this proposal, but I would be looking for some support.
Okay, very good. Very thorough presentation. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
So I'd say I'm impressed with the collection rate for the insurance group. And in particular, I'm sure that many of your responses are time-sensitive things. You know, if I go to the doctor's office, then I can stand in line at the reception area. Yes, here's my card, here's all that information. Many of the responses that you have, you've got to get people on the road as quickly as possible. So I'm just impressed with how you're able to, obtain the insurance information in those situations. And so
It's a testament to the men and women of the department. I think they realize the importance of this, because it does help the department and the taxpayers as a whole. And again, I would be very concerned if there would be other issues if our collection rates for the insured were poor. I wouldn't be asking you for increasing our rates, because there's other things that we would have to start fixing before I came to you.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Ms. Braccio.
Thank you. Good job, Chief. I appreciate the presentation. It was great. And I agree we should be competitive to our counterparts in the fire service as well. Just a couple quick questions for you. I know on your overview screen, you had said that we only bill for the 567 transports. I don't think that truly reflects the number of calls. And I think if you happen to have a number floating in your head, I think it might be interesting for the public to know the number of calls that your department actually goes on. I mean, these are billable and it generates revenue, but there are a lot of other times you don't transport. So I think I think it's a huge number myself, but.
We do about 1,500 responses a year from the whole fire department. And about 80% of those, so a little over 1,000, are ambulance-related responses. And again, I think it's appropriate that if you call the ambulance for an emergency and it's not, that you're not getting a bill. And I know some other agencies have looked at other ways to offset their costs, but I think you're right. Put in perspective, we do about 1,000 or more ambulance calls a year, and some of them, people refuse treatment or transport, or they weren't the ones that called, and we don't transport them.
Thank you. I just think it's important for the public to know it's not just this many calls you go on, you're very much busier than that. And then just a quick question on the billing. In increasing the rate, I don't know quite what the formula is for the allowable. If we increase the rate, is that going to increase the allowable, or, in looking at your overview, how will that affect actually what's collected?
So I'm going to try, and I appreciate the question. I don't want to get really deep into this, but
Yep.
I'll try to give an overview.
Yep.
Is that, for example, for people that have Blue Cross, we charged last year $92,000 about.
Yep.
Their allowable was just around $92,000. We collected $88,000.
Okay.
So we were 96%.
Perfect.
Medicare, we total charge of about $387,000. We're allowable is $116,000. So you can see the,
Yep.
but out of that 116, we collected 113. So when I was trying to calculate what is our potential revenue, I looked at a couple different factors of how much would increase our, for number of calls we do per category, what is the allowable, what's our collection rate, and, I think we could collect, anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000 if we do it right. Please don't quote me when I'm at budget time, but, I think that versus if our collection rate was poor and we had other issues that we had to resolve internally, just because you increase your rates doesn't mean you're gonna make more money. There's a whole bunch of factors you
Yep.
have to put in that.
Okay.
Fortunately, there's some communities that their Medicare is like 60 to 80% of their responses, so it's even more challenging for them. We have about a 50-50 mix.
Great, thank you. That put it in the perspective I was looking for. Thank you.
Mr. Stivers first.
Thanks, Chief. Very interesting. There's a quick follow-on to Ms. Braccio's question. Two issues here. One is if we increase what we bill to some crazy number like $1 million or whatever, that's actually not going to reflect in greater collections in a variety of places here. But the other element in there is the coding process, in that as you're probably aware, if you go to your doctor's office and they do a procedure, there's some latitude they have in terms of how they code that for filing a medical claim. And are we confident that we are actually being accurate but complete in terms of that process? So, for example, if we could file a claim for additional services that we actually provide, but sometimes we don't actually code for, is there opportunity there, or are you confident that we have accurate coding and then drives that into the claim process so we're getting paid appropriately?
Speaking to ComStar, I think we do a pretty solid job, but there's room for improvement. We can't miss code, because that would be
Right.
inappropriate, and
Right.
if you get audited,
Right.
and I would not put the town in that position.
Don't want to do that, certainly.
But there's a link between what we are dispatched for, what's the problem, what we assess the problem to be, sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different, sometimes it's worse, and then documenting our skills. So we have a couple of our members monitor quality assurance on our ambulance transports to make sure, one, for what the complaint was and what was found, are we doing the right thing?
Right.
And by doing that, our coding, if you will, ALS 1 versus ALS 2 is better, but this is one area that I want to monitor, and we've talked to all crew members of identifying if you go for something serious, And it is, make sure you document it, don't minimize that it wasn't as big a deal.
Right. Yeah, good, because it seems to me that's an opportunity to, clearly generate some revenue, but it's also one that's related to training and ongoing management to make sure that the folks who are responding are aware of those structures and doing the right thing in terms of coding. One other comment that I recall hearing in the past 6 months or so, was a conversation from our advisory committee who was looking at the ambulance billing process. And I don't know where that went, but that might be an interesting base to touch, because I think they spent some time looking into those processes and numbers and might have some suggestions about things we might want to consider relative to that.
And I look forward, as we move into the planning for next year's budget, to work with them to see if this is in line with what they were thinking, but also do they have ideas for other opportunities? And then how do we use this additional revenue or the revenue generated by the ambulance appropriately?
Yep. And I think one of their members actually did some of this stuff for a living, so has a pretty detailed understanding of it. So that could be an interesting resource. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Calendo.
Chief, good to see you.
Good evening.
Great to have you in the chair and in the uniform and serving the town, so.
I'm saying it's kind of nice to be on this side and not in an
Yes.
interview, so
Yes.
thank you.
And I agree with you. I think the rates haven't been looked at for some time. They should be. I trust our costs have gone up and the rates need to go up. My question to you is, did I understand you correctly? Did you say that that the rates that you're looking to have set would cause this to be revenue positive, meaning we're charging more than we should be to then utilize some funds for other things? That's my concern. I'm with you if we're charging what we should charge to, satisfy the cost that we incur. I'm more uneasy if we're charging more to then be able to fund other things.
Right now, in just some real rough numbers I ran today, and they're very rough. The ambulance revenue we bring in offsets but does not cover the full cost of providing the services we do. I also recognize that it's an opportunity to appropriately fund and create a revenue source that offsets any impact of any initiatives as a new chief and moving forward that I may suggest. I don't have any earmarks saying at this point, I want to bring in this much money and I have it earmarked for that much money. But looking at the ambulance fund, our current capital improvement plan, the operating budget, it would be inappropriate for me to ask for revisions or additions to those without looking first at what opportunities do I have as a department to lessen that burden. So I think you are hearing that. I think there's an opportunity to increase our revenue to look at either sustaining the ambulance fund over time, or looking at if we do initiate anything in the next couple of years, that it's not, I'm not asking for a big lift.
So I guess that's for my other board members to consider as well. I mean, if we, for instance, we just talked about recently the transfer station fees. Should we increase those more than we need to? Because then we may want to do something over here with, where does it stop? If we start asking people to pay more than they should for something because we may have, you'll get to know this when working together. I am incredibly supportive of our police and fire and want to ensure that you're fully funded in everything that you need to keep our residents safe. And so when you come when it's budget time and you come with an initiative and you have a need and it goes to safety of our residents, you're gonna receive a positive response. I get worried about using fees to then try to do that a different way. So my concern with approving this or voting to support it right now is that did you raise them too much? Should they be, or are you gonna raise, you would like to see them raised at this level and then see what comes out after this first year, and then we do this again next year? That's my concern, is charging too much.
And I appreciate that question. I can tell you that raising the rates to the market rate is not an attempt to overcharge, because right now, we're not even covering all our costs to provide ambulance services. And rough numbers, just for personnel, is way above what we bring in for revenue. So there's really no, I'm bringing in another $50,000 or $60,000 or $100,000 over the course of the next year is not gonna wash that difference out. But I think it's a reasonable approach for the department that has a revenue stream to apply a measured, sustainable approach to minimizing the impact of our services on the taxpayers. So I think this is an appropriate measure at this time. And within the next year, we will know, is this appropriate or not? Are we bringing the revenue? And as a board that makes decisions on how that's spent, at least you'll know our request, we're considering that these request impacts on the taxpayer.
Okay, so the rates that you're suggesting are, from your research, market rates, not anything more or anything less. And if we happen to receive more revenue, we'll discuss that, and you'll let us know next year, and we can analyze this again. If you don't receive enough, surely we'll have this discussion again about raising it for the following year, right?
And just to be clear, I think everyone understands, the department doesn't get the revenue. Just, so it doesn't go back in our budget.
Mm-hmm.
It is a general fund or ambulance fund. So I think that's an important distinction, that you didn't approve a $2 million budget and then I bring in more money and also my budget's automatically 200 plus. And I think that's important because I think we're doing our part overall as a department to minimize that impact of what we do.
All right. Thank you, Chief.
Hi, Chief, how are you?
Hey,
My
very
turn.
good.
I'm going to make some assumptions and correct me if I'm wrong. The raising the rate will have no effect on the amount of money we get from folks who are relying on Medicare to pay for their ambulance.
Correct.
Okay. I think, and again, this is an assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, it is likely to have little or no effect on the folks who have insurance.
For them, out of pocket, there will be little to no, unless they have a higher deductible, and some insurance plans do.
But in terms of the revenue to the town, it would have no effect either. In other words, the insurance company has a fixed cost that they pay as a result of the fee that's charged.
Normally, different insurance carriers, private insurance carriers, will pay what's customarily allowed. If you bill less, they will say, well, I'd rather pay less. So if we billed them $100 for that service, they would give us $100 back.
No, I understand that. I'm just
And
wondering.
So if we increase our rates, there will be opportunity for the private insurance carriers to pay more to us.
If their determination of the customary rate is higher than that.
Yes.
And do we know that for the various insurance companies?
I didn't drill down that far, and this is always, I didn't want to make it this complicated, and I apologize. And there's people in the audience that probably know a lot more about medical billing than I do. One of the other challenges, it's bigger than us, is the fact that Centers for Medicare and Medicare Services and other insurance carriers are trying to figure out what is the going rate. And if services continue to charge less, then their going rate will be low. And they'll set their rates low. So I think it's reasonable, and that's why I did what's customary and what is the top 50 of Massachusetts, that if you were picked up in another town that had the higher rates, their experiences with the private insurance, they're getting more revenue. So if you got picked up in Boston and it was higher, I don't know I don't know what the rates are, but, so the private insurance carriers, that is the avenue or one of the opportunities when you increase the rates to have them pay more.
Yeah, because if at the end of the day, what we're doing is, right now, is giving the insurance companies a haircut, basically, and charging them less than Westboro is, or whomever, because their going rate is higher than that, then that's clearly a revenue source for the town that I'm certainly supportive of going after. If, however, raising these rates has little or no effect on people with Medicare, little or no effect on people with private insurance, but basically the revenue source would be the percentage of people without private insurance. My assumption, and I don't think we're going to resolve this tonight, my assumption is most people who don't have either Medicare coverage or private insurance have so not by choice, but because they can't afford it. And so we'd be raising rates with our spear pointed right at the people who are least able to afford it. And that
So
concerns
to
me.
clarify, and if I misspoke or misinterpreted, but people with Medicare and Medicaid, it will have little impact. There'd be some.
Absolutely.
But with the private insurance carriers, which basically Blue Cross and other insurance carriers, which we build out about $300,000, we would see an increase in revenue if we increased our rates. And I can also say that the town you cited has higher rates than we do, and they've had positive success with increasing their rates.
Okay. You understand my concern, though, about
Right.
the people who don't have insurance. And I'm also, I think you said that I understand that there's no credit agency impact or the like, but could be wrong. I'm guessing there hasn't been an awful lot of research on the category of people who don't have any sort of insurance and are in arrears on the payments they're making. Again, my assumption is that if people don't have insurance to cover their pickup by an ambulance, that it's not by a choice, that they're
Correct.
basically playing some Russian roulette with the hope that they don't have an ambulance service, and they don't have the ability to pay.
And that's important because that's where the hardship and the abatements come in. If you do not have the ability to pay, in my previous employer and here, I would not want to send somebody to collections or have an attachment or I mean, we don't do that.
Yep.
And as you can see, that's a small percentage. The avenue to get, cover things is some people that don't have health insurance have auto insurance. And that may be another area that's not connected to the rates, directly, that we need to seek. But if we have rates that are competitive and we can build another type of insurance, that will have a positive effect too.
Okay, I guess where I come out, and it's actually pretty close to where Mr. Kalenda is. Excellent presentation, and assuming which way the assumptions cut, this is a revenue source that the town should be tapping and can be tapping. I'm going to be really interested to see, assuming we approve this tonight, where things are in a year, and because it doesn't seem worth it if, on the one hand, from the insurance category, we're not getting additional revenue, and all we're doing is creating additional collection issues for people who don't have insurance.
And I'll just finish with, that ties in exactly why you don't go too high, because then you charge $500,000 or $50,000 for an ambulance transport, and you only collect $1,000, your collection rate is horrible. And as a budgetary and accounting practice, you don't do that.
All right.
And it doesn't mean you're gonna get more money. That's why I think a appropriate measured response, and what I presented to you was, I think, a measured, appropriate response, and I think it's sustainable at this time. But like you, being new to this system, I think the test over time would be how well do we do with this? Because I could come to you next year and say, we need to leave the rates where they are. You know, you don't automatically raise them every year thinking you're gonna make more and more money. To Selectman Clinda's point, you don't wanna just keep on going back to the well, because if it's not sustainable or equitable, you wouldn't do that. But because we're 4 years, almost 5 years from any rate adjustment, I think if I know this, it would be inappropriate for me to not come to you and ask for this approval.
Fair enough. Appreciate the initiative and the preparedness.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Mr. Kalenda?
Not a question, just with the understanding that you'll come back to us with some data after you've done this for a period of time, maybe it's a
Yes.
year. But I would move that we vote to approve the rates as provided in the presentation.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any other discussion, Mr. Stivers?
One quick follow-up point. I think that there is opportunity there. Actually, I'm in the claim business myself. And I think that there needs to be careful attention on the abatement and hardship process with this increase. But I think that my experience has been that the reimbursement process across the various insurance companies is Byzantine, and that it's very difficult to predict what people are going to reimburse for a variety of services. And so I think that it's worth testing that water and see if there's opportunity there. If it's not, then we cut back. But I think there's a good chance that we will find, again, with careful coding, that there's available resources there that we can tap. So good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief,
Thank you,
for coming.
Chief. Next scheduled appointment is board and committee interviews. With the boards, okay, I'm gonna go out of order for one quick second and introduce, and actually go to consent agenda, item A, appointment of Recreation Director. Tim Davis is here. He's not actually scheduled for an interview tonight, but he was able to attend this evening, and I thought it'd be nice to give him an opportunity to meet the board and for us to welcome him to town. So, Mr. Davis, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and
Of course. Good evening.
welcome.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My name's Tim Davis, from Millis, Massachusetts, so not too far away from here. Currently the director in Stoughton, soon to be here. So just finishing up my time down in Stoughton. Been in the career at this for about 10 years now. Born and raised in Connecticut, moved up to Massachusetts for school at Springfield, and never left. Got my undergrad at Springfield. Actually left for a little bit, got my master's at Southern Connecticut. Graduated at the worst time possible with the economy. So I said, hey, why not spend more money and go back to school? Got my master's in rec in Southern Connecticut, and then day after I graduated, moved up here and worked for Brookline Recreation. I was a programmer for their department for 3.5 years. Moved over to Stoughton as the assistant director after that, which eventually became the director, and that's where I am now. Love the field, love my job. I don't see it as a job. I think I'm very lucky to be able to call this a career. And when this, a lot of things going on in Stoughton right now, and when this job popped up, it really caught my eye. And the more I looked into the town, the more I looked into the department, kind of what the department is doing, looking at where they're looking to go, both with the direction of the commission, direction of all the capital projects, rec specific, but also with the town. It was overwhelmingly appealing. And flash for a month and a half, here I am. So I just want to say publicly that in the last month I've met the commission, I met DPW, administrators in this town. Everyone's been incredibly welcoming. It's been really a blast meeting everybody. It's been enjoyable every visit I've had to town. So thank you guys for that, for the warm welcome, and I'm very excited to get started.
I've heard nothing but very, very positive things, so
Thank you very much.
happy.
Glad to hear that.
Look forward to working with you for many years to come.
Thank you.
Any comment, Mr. Healy?
No, you got big shoes to fill.
I do. I know
You've
that.
been well served by Ms. Ferguson
Absolutely.
for quite a while.
Mhm.
But hearing your background and having looked at it, I think you're going to enjoy Southborough, and we're looking forward to having you.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Brascio.
Thank you. Oh, I just wanted to welcome you and let you know how excited we are. It's a whole new direction for our recreation. You've got a good commission to work with, so I think I see a lot of positive things, so welcome.
Thank you.
Same here. Impressive resume. I look forward to seeing you cross the finish line first at the Gobble Wobble.
Challenge accepted.
Maybe second behind me, but that's all right.
Politically, that's a good place to be. Do you play golf?
I do.
Good. Again, welcome aboard. Excited to see where this is going to go, and I think there's a lot of upside for the rec department here in a variety of ways, so
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add that we do have some commission members here this evening, and I'm very pleased during our entire recruitment process that every member of the commission was able to participate and meet and spend some time with Tim, as well as the staff and Mark and myself. So we're very pleased with the process and with the opportunity to bring Tim on board shortly.
Very good. So with that, I will move appointment of the Recreation Director.
Second.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Welcome.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. All right, we'll go back up to scheduled appointments. I'm going to go next to Ms. Keese for Council on Aging appointment.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming. And thank you for your interest in the Council on Aging. And what if you just take a couple of minutes to tell us about yourself and for your reason for your interest in serving on the Council on Aging?
Well, I've lived in town, my family has lived in town for 47 years. Probably most of you know my daughter, Kim Ivers, who's been at the library since she was 9. She's now the children's librarian.
Yeah.
Interest in aging is, I'm there. And it's a wonderful community, and to be part of it is a privilege. And I'd like to be able to be more involved in them.
Excellent. So, thank you very much for your interest in joining, and
Thank you.
turn it over to see if there's any other comments. Ms. Braccio.
Thank you, welcome for coming.
Thank
I
you.
would highly recommend Mrs. Keese. I've dealt with her quite a bit at the senior center, and she does a lot with the Meals on Wheels, and she's always there to help whenever help is needed. So I think she's going to be a tremendous addition to the Council on Aging. And thank you so much for stepping forward to do this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mr. Kalenda.
I could not agree more. So if I may ask your indulgence, that your activity form that you provided to us is one of the best I've ever seen. I mean, what you do
thank
for
you.
this town and what you've done for so many should be recognized by the public here as well as the viewing public. You had stated to us in 2014, I started volunteering as a Meals on Wheels driver. I have been active in the Southborough Senior Center for years, participating in the Trailblazers, organizing as well as chaperoning some trips, volunteering in the Autumn Fair and delivering caregiver meals since the program's inception in 2017. I have been participating in Council on Aging meetings since November 2018. I'm very interested in the Council of Aging as I find myself being one of the seniors whose life is enriched by its programs.
Very
Being
much.
retired, my time to serve in the council is flexible. Outstanding what you have done for the town.
Thank you.
And I wholeheartedly look forward to supporting you as their newest member.
Thank you.
Mr. Stivers.
It's great to get capable, dedicated volunteers for these kind of positions, so I'm delighted that you're applying for this, and I strongly support your
Thank you, Sam.
appointment. Thank you.
Mr. Healy.
We're lucky. And the town's lucky. Thank you very much for being interested in doing this.
My pleasure, actually. I feel that we should embrace it. Many are denied the privilege of getting to this stage in life. So,
Good. Thank you. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of appointing Ms. Keese to the Council on Aging for term 6/30/22?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, and
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you for coming.
Enjoy very much what's going on over there.
It's a happening place.
That it is.
Is Mr. Pete here?
I don't see him.
I do not see Mr. Pete either. Okay. We're going to move next to Michael Robbins for ZBA full member, effective 7/1/19. Mr. Robbins, thank you for coming.
Evening. How y'all doing?
And so Michael currently serves as one of the alternates on the ZBA. and had indicated his desire to be reappointed to that position, and then a vacancy opened up in one of the full-time positions. I know at least there are a couple new members that haven't had the chance to talk with you. I know you have met with us, with this board on other occasions a couple times, so thank you again for coming in. And if you could just tell us briefly about yourself and your interest in the ZBA, and we can then turn it over to the board.
Sure. Briefly, I moved back to Southborough with my young family approximately 3 years ago. I had subsequently lived in Rhode Island, and then prior to that, when I was growing up, I grew up here in Southborough. My family moved here in '78, I want to say. I graduated from Algonquin. I'm a real estate attorney. I practice real estate conveyance work, simply, buying, selling real estate. I do handle some zoning matters for clients depending on the towns. But typically, my experience is residential and commercial transactional work. I've been practicing for 17 years, and I'm licensed in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Florida. I've been on the Southborough Zoning Board for just over 2 years. Prior to that, I was on the Grafton Zoning Board of Appeals for 5 years. That's it.
Good. Thank you
That's it?
again
Nothing?
for
No.
coming.
That's all you got? Tonight, that's more than enough.
That's a lot.
This is my busy season, so.
Questions, comments? Mr. Healy?
Hi, Mr. Robbins, how are you?
I'm well.
I'm one of the people who haven't had an opportunity to consider your appointment as an alternate in the past, so just a few questions, though. As an alternate, how many opportunities did you have to actually participate in ZBA meetings over the last year or so?
The way the Southborough handles it, alternates typically don't actively participate. I think I may have actively participated in two meetings.
Did you attend pretty regularly?
Every.
You did? Oh,
Yes.
terrific. You have a real estate practice.
I do.
Is there the potential, I mean, if you've attended for a year, you've had the opportunity to see the various sort of matters coming before the
Certainly.
ZBA. Is there potential for your practice intersecting with and potentially conflicting with some of your responsibilities on the ZBA?
Certainly, there's always a potential. Anytime, let's say a realtor that referred me to business for either commercial or residential work was in front of the board seeking a special permit or other type of relief, then I'd simply recuse myself from that matter. With respect to on an individual basis, let's say I did Lisa's purchase a few years ago, and if she had a matter, I'd certainly run that by the state board of whether or not that would necessitate a conflict, simply because the scope of my representation would have ended at the time that sale or purchase would have concluded. So it's not an ongoing representation. In Grafton, I think there was one time that a realtor was seeking relief, and I just recused myself from that matter. Just
Okay.
because that's an ongoing relationship.
Yeah, no 1 year is going to be like any other, but of the matters you saw before the ZBA in the past year or so, had you been participating in meetings, were there any matters you would have had to recuse on?
None in the last
Okay.
year and a half or 2 years I've been on the board now.
Okay, and just as a member of a board, give me an idea of what your decision-making process is like, how you approach it?
To me, zoning is relatively a boring matter that sometimes gets dusted off and creates a lot of public consternation. But to me, it's as simple as we have the Mass General laws, sections 40A, sometimes 40B. It's applying the statutes and the Southborough bylaws. The petitioner, if they file the correct petition and they are eligible for relief, I'm able to then grant it. If they are ineligible, then it's my duty, like say for a variance, no one has a legal right to a variance. If they don't meet the criteria to get that variance, then the answer is no. It's relatively speaking, straightforward. Unfortunately, I feel the process can be corrupted by personality, and honestly, I think there's not enough training for a lot of this. It's a quasi-judicial board, and unfortunately, really the cart comes before the horse. You have people who can just become a member, don't know the laws, don't know the statutes, haven't read the bylaws, and then are making legal decisions that affect other residents with no understanding of the application of those statutes. And unfortunately, there's no, like, if you want to be on the zoning board, like, we've got some openings, a warm body, you're up. Let's go. And the reality is if you want to do it, there should be a set dedicated program for A, welcoming in new members, and then B, here's some real concrete training. Like, here's what a special permit is. Here's a variance. These are the two, that's 90% of what we do. Certainly there's 40B, but even as a practicing attorney and being on Grafton, I only sat on the end of one 40B. I mean, very few people have experience on 40Bs. That's why most towns usually hire an advocate to help the board process 40B petitions, because they are so overwhelmingly complex, and the zoning board now has to sit in for the planning board and conservation, and those aren't roles that any of the board members are typically prepared or trained for, and that therein lies the problem.
All right, well said, and appreciate your willingness to throw your hat into the ring.
Yeah.
And very, very impressed with the fact that as an alternate, you attended the meetings for a year. That's pretty impressive. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Ms. Braccio?
Good evening, welcome. Just a couple quick questions for you. One, to kind of expand on the training that you mentioned. I know last September, I think it was, Town Council did a training for ZBA and Planning Board, and that's probably something we could certainly expand on. I know there was relatively good turnout from the ZBA for that, but that's certainly something that, probably a conversation with the board versus having a conversation with us, that Town Council could probably put something a little more comprehensive together, as he's done.
Thankfully, the board that Southborough has that's currently constituted, it's really unfortunate Andrew's stepping down, because he's really, really well educated on the subject, and we've got, honestly, for someone who practices in front of other boards, we have probably one of the best ZBAs right now as constituted that you can ask for. Certainly, if there's any alternate, especially alternate women who could step up, we've got to get more balance. Trust me, for someone who practices in front of the old boy network on a regular basis, more women are definitely wanted in those seats, because they really bring separate perspective. But at the same time, the board that we have, we always need additional training, because there's new laws that come out. I mean, I took it upon myself to take a 40B class because I knew some of the issues that are herein. But that was on my own expense, and I go, well, I need to take continuing education credits for my practice anyways, so it's an automatic. Our board's well constituted now. It's the new members that, because we're gonna have turnover, we're gonna have churn, and it's about having the next alternates ready to step into those shoes without being blown out of the water.
No, I absolutely agree, and I appreciate your comments on more women stepping forward, obviously.
Yes.
Just one other quick question. Do you view yourself, if you step forward into this role, which I think you would do a great job on, do you view currently based on what you've seen in the last 2 years, do you view any local conflicts? It's kind of expanding a little on what Mr. Healy asked. There's lots of things going on in town, and do you see a conflict of any type?
I really don't. And if there were, this is not a fun thing to do. I do it because it is, I get to scratch an intellectual itch. I feel it's my duty to contribute to my local community. It is a need, and I'm able to use my skills to hopefully help the town as best I can. That being said, the idea of sitting on zoning board of appeals and dealing with those issues, stepping forward is not the way I'd put forward. It's everyone out who wants to volunteer, and everybody else steps back, and
Yep.
I'm left there. But at the same time, it's a really important position and it needs to be filled. I don't see any real zoning conflicts, and if there did, I'd be thrilled to step out of the way.
No,
I just,
I
one less
agree.
meeting, mazel tov.
No, I agree, and, I was impressed when you would come forward before. We've had many conversations since then, so I think you're a very good candidate. If I could just add one thing, Mr. Shea, maybe before the conversation ends, we have a member of ZBA sitting in the audience. Maybe she might have something she might like to add before the conversation closes.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kalenda.
Mr. Robbins, welcome. I definitely wanted to have you come and speak with us. The ZBA, as you know, is one of the most powerful boards that we have in town, and I think it's wise for us to ensure that the applicant is ready, willing, and able to discharge those duties, and for the residents to see you and hear from you. Obviously, there have been some very significant matters come before the ZBA. Tensions run high. Room could be full, which you've seen. And you've got developers who may want one thing. You've got residents who want something else. Where do you fall? Are you a pro-developer? Are you pro what a resident wants? Or are you pro what the law provides?
To me, I think that's where the things get lost on zoning. Once you start adding, the problem with most local boards, and it's just not Southborough, it's not Grafton, it's, oh, Dan and I, we've known each other since kindergarten. You want what you want, here you go. And that's the problem. It's really easy. Special permits, the threshold is really low. 1 + 1 = 2, done. Easy, granted. I always joke, I go, if you have someone who wants to put in a back deck and they need zoning board relief, if they meet the criteria, it's that simple. I'm sorry if the neighbors may or may not like that, they meet the criteria. I can't pick winners and losers from a administrative standpoint. I just don't like it. I think it's unfair. And I think board members that do that are really making a mistake, because they're just trying to hook up their people, or they have their own, like, I don't want any development, or I'm pro-development. The minute you start putting in your own bias, you're really letting everybody else down. And I just don't think that has any place. Variances, I'm pretty strict on variances. There's no legal right for one. Sorry. If my role as a member of a zoning board is that if you need relief and you meet the criteria, then we can give you a variance. But if anything, I'm strongly opposed to handing out variances like candy, like I've seen many boards do over the years.
Yeah, and I know that even, town meeting changed that itself, so.
Well, that was a use variance.
Use variance, but
But that's.
a form of variance.
But a different one than most variances that appear before the board typically are not a use
So I
variance.
think, the main thing that I think you just stated, you stated well, if the applicant meets the criteria, it doesn't matter if is one resident lined up against or 50, if it fits within the parameters of what the law provides, then okay.
Most people that show up are going to be opposed. That's just the facts. Most people who come to a zoning board meeting are there to say they're against something. The room is not going to be packed with a bunch of people in support. That I can save you a lot of time. And so rooms
know.
get filled when they want no's.
And are you gonna do, so, yeah, I understand where you're
Yeah,
going.
so, like,
And that's
you
the.
gotta be used to saying
And I'm
no.
sensing that you have the fortitude to do what is required regardless of how much you get yelled at.
If I have to say no to you, I'll see you at Morrow's and have a cup of coffee with you. But like, I just don't have the time, energy, or inclination to honestly, I get about 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, not kidding. I don't care that you're upset. Like, I got some
Well
other
said.
problems.
So, lights at Finn.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, that passed overwhelmingly at
Yes.
town meeting. You were a vocal
Absolutely.
advocate against.
Absolutely.
If that matter comes before you, do you recuse yourself, or, because you were a private citizen, which is fine?
Yeah,
Or do you, I guess at some point, you'll have to make that judgment.
I would have to make that
If you're
judgment.
sitting on the matter, are you able to dispassionately review that matter? And if the applicant meets the criteria,
I'd probably have to sit out for that one specific, I'm too closely emotionally. I feel that Southborough broke its promise to the citizens when that school got built, so if that came before me, I'd probably recuse myself, just
Okay.
because I have an inherent bias to it, and I don't think it would be fair for everyone else.
all right.
It's just
Any
that-
other
that's-
inherent biases that you want to disclose
How
now?
many other promises has Southborough
So,
broken?
but I appreciate that, I think you're incredibly well qualified for this. I'm glad you came before us. And I look forward to supporting you and seeing that level of dispassionate analysis applied to whatever matter comes before you.
It's supposed to be boring, and it should be.
Well done.
Mr. Stivers.
Good evening. Thank you. Welcome, and I think your qualifications are substantial here, so it's good to get someone with your background in front of us here. As a former member of the zoning board, always an interesting balance there. One of the things that's a challenge that I found, at least, is that you're exactly right, that the law is fairly clear on variances, and the threshold is extremely high. If you look historically, Southborough Zoning Board tends to grant 80+% of the variance applications that come in front of it. There are other towns where that percentage is flipped, as a matter of fact. And the challenge, I think, is trying to combine the requirements of the law with what makes sense from a practical standpoint. So I think you've got to do reasonable things and not go overboard in terms of making sidebar deals or whatever with people, but try to be consistent with that process. To not be such a slave to the law that people can't do what is, by most standards, a reasonable thing.
Certainly.
That's the challenge, I think. And so I can't agree with you more about the training stuff. I fought with that one continually, and it's a difficult task, and it's a complex area, and there historically has been very little training provided, and I think that's something that town council and others should continue to work on. I certainly support that. The issue for me is conflict, particularly here, and so I'm encouraged to hear you say that as you look back over the last year or two, there aren't any cases that have come before the board that you would have been conflicted for. I'm assuming that also means that there aren't folks in town who are frequent travelers at the permitting boards that you have ongoing business relationships with, or are there those,
No.
or not many here?
I really don't. I know Bill DePietri personally. I don't think I've ever worked with Bill professionally. The Bartolinis are family friends of ours for decades. Again, I only would work with them on a peripheral, like they're not clients of mine. But those are like two local builders that
Right.
I know, especially the Bartolini
Yep.
family, very well. And again, thankfully, at least for Jack, Jack is super knowledgeable, and, really presents his arguments very well. If I ever felt there was a conflict, again, I'd love to take a night off.
Yep. And I think that, for me, is sort of the heart of the issue. Given the history, the last half dozen years or so with zoning in town, I think there is a necessity to be particularly scrupulous about the conflict stuff. I understand the distinction between technical conflict of interest and approval from the AG's office that,
Well
yes,
said.
you are permitted to participate, and they stand behind your assessment that I'm objective and I'm able to deal fairly with this issue. But I think from a practical standpoint, you need to go a step further, at least in the current environment, and
I
say,
agree.
I'm going to be very aggressive in terms of if there's the appearance of conflict, or if the reasonable person out there in town might look at this and say, gee, I think that there's a conflict there, even though technically there may not be. I would strongly urge you to be very conservative about approaching that.
No, I think you're right, Sam, because what happens is the standards for the state are relatively high. Like, so Dan's question about the lights, I probably would pass whether or not I'm able, like, oh, am I conflicted out on that? But you have to ask yourself, can I give an unbiased decision on something I feel passionate about? And I
Well,
don't think you can.
And I think I think many people could be objective about
Yeah.
those things. The issue for me is, will the rest of the world believe that? And so you can't prove any of that. On the other hand, I guess I'm prepared to support you, but I would ask you to assure me that you would be very conservative in terms of your approach to appearance
I
of
can
conflict.
assure you, but, in this heightened area, I also don't want to have a few outliers that, oh, Michael's done a deal with so-and-so 10 years ago, and he's,
Well, there's no.
I don't like to have, the far left or the far right
Yeah, I
dictate
understand.
about.
I understand, but again, I think there's a range in there that
I agree with
a
you,
reasonable
though.
person
I really
might
do.
look at something and say,
Yeah, no, I know
I
what
don't
you're
have
saying.
confidence there. So I think that's an important part of the job, is to, again, reinforce the public's confidence in the permitting process.
I agree, and I think some of the issues go back to the smell of things. Things just smell bad, and you know what? The only way to do that is, let's just keep it straight and play the cards as they are.
Yep.
And go from there.
And hopefully be reasonable on the variances.
You have to be. That's what our job. If you just
Yep.
want to follow the
Yep.
statute, almost no one's going to get a
Right,
variance
exactly.
ever.
Yep.
So that's my job, is to interpret that and see if
Balance.
relief can be granted. And that's really my role.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stivers. Any other questions, comments from the board? Any other comments, questions? Doesn't appear so. Mr. Kalenda.
I would move that we vote to approve Mr. Robbins as a ZBA full member effective 7/1/19, term to 6/30/24.
Second?
Motion was made, seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Congratulations.
Passes
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank you.
congratulations.
Condolences.
Celebrate that.
All right, next, Mr. McKay and the EDC, the Downtown Initiative Update.
I know, look at our time.
Good evening, folks.
Mr. McKay, good evening.
Pleasure to see you all again. So I do, oh boy.
Sorry, here you go. It'll
So-
appear soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Marika. So I should recognize Marika Munsif, who is our Economic Development Coordinator. I'm sure you folks have seen her around, but I wanted to mention how much help she's been and really how fantastic she has been in getting right up to speed on EDC initiatives very quickly. So I would be remiss if I didn't recognize that. So thank you again for having the EDC here tonight. I drew the short straw of getting to give you a quick update, and I really wanted to talk about kind of two things quickly. One is just to give you kind of the quick status update of the work that we've done since the last time we met with the Selectmen, which I think was about a month ago. A number of you were there, but there were a couple who weren't. But I can give you a quick status update on that. And then I wanted to share a little bit, not the whole PowerPoint. We went through this last time, but I've added some things to it that I think, kind of articulate in pictures what we have in mind in terms of the vision for this downtown initiative. And I think that sort of vision piece, there's a lot more to come in terms of the vision piece and how we put that together. But I think it's an important part of the project, and certainly welcome any feedback from the board, but really more than anything else, appreciate the opportunity to keep this issue at the forefront, which is certainly really important to the EDC and to the residents, I think, as well. So first, in terms of status update, when we had talked last time, and as you know, zoning is an important piece of trying to revitalize our downtown. So we have applied for, one of our newer members, Rob Anderson, is also the Economic Development Director for the town of Billerica, and we're fortunate enough to have him here in Southborough. And he alerted us to this grant opportunity. So we put together I say we, Claire Reynolds put together an outstanding grant application along with Marika and some of the other folks on the committee to apply for a $50,000 grant from the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development. And we asked for money to do two things, one of which is to get technical assistance and consulting assistance on zoning, and the second piece is to use some of those funds to do a feasibility study for some form of a collective wastewater system, whether that be, basically a collective septic system or a hydroponic system or something like that. And that would provide an opportunity for some of the existing business owners who have some pretty significant septic issues down there, but also give us the flexibility to do other things that we might want to do downtown. So we've applied for that grant. Hopefully we'll hear shortly that that's been granted. I should also point out that I happened to mention it to Representative Dykema, who was fantastic, and without even asking, put in a letter, both signed by her and Senator Eldridge, to the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development supporting our grant application. So our representatives have tried to support us in that effort, which is fantastic. In addition to that, the EDC is starting to try and identify towns that we think, just from kind of an aesthetic feel perspective, have the downtown that we might want to emulate. And this is not to say that every town is the same, and no one town that we pick, and so I'm not going to mention any of them to you tonight, because we're still trying to kind of develop that list. But the point of the exercise is not to say we want to be just like that town, but we want to start identifying some characteristics and look at the zoning bylaws in some of these other places to do some of our own homework. So we're going to use that as a framework as well, and we've started to do that. We've also set up a meeting, I think it's gotten rescheduled from the 20th to the 28th, but a couple of members of the committee are going to go to the town of Weston and look at their hydroponic wastewater treatment system. It's not even fair to call it a wastewater treatment system because it looks like a greenhouse. And we don't know a whole lot about it yet, but it's really just in the light of educating ourselves of the potential options that we might have. So we're going to go check that out in a week or so. We have also been very active in reaching out to other boards and committees. You know that we have reached out to the Planning Board a number of times, and we've appeared before them. We're going to be meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals. As a matter of fact, I think that's later on this week that we're meeting with the ZBA. We've also reached out to Shopsy, Trails, and Recreation, so we're setting up meetings with all those folks. And again, the point of that exercise is to try and gather as much information we can and to get some other perspectives on what this initiative should look like. And the last thing that we're doing is we have started working with Waterman Design in Westboro, a very well-respected engineering firm, and they've recently changed names. They're now WDA Design. And we're talking to them about doing some potential renderings for us of some concepts of things that folks might consider for the downtown. So some of this might be not necessarily particular to any site. Others may be a particular site and what could happen at that site if we had the kind of zoning and all of the sort of angels lined up to give us the kind of project that we might like. So I think that's going to be an interesting exercise to see kind of what comes out of that. And again, that's aimed towards trying to build consensus over what we'll do, because maybe folks will see the renderings that Waterman has put together, and either the committee won't like it or the residents won't like it or whatnot. And so this is trying to put, in kind of image form, what the ultimate outcome of this initiative could be. Which leads me to the second issue that I wanted to talk about, And that's really the vision and why we think this is such an important exercise for our town. Now, many of these slides the board has seen from the last time that we appeared. I wanted to talk about the pictures a little bit. And these are new. These have been added to the slideshow that I anticipate will be kind of the framework for our roadshow as we take this initiative to other boards and committees. But this really tells the story, I think, over time of what's happened to our downtown. And what I think we want to keep in mind as we try and recapture some of the elements that we've lost over time. And now many of you who've been in town for a long time have probably seen some of these images before. I will admit that I wasn't. I had not seen a lot of this stuff before. And I think a lot of residents who are newer to town may not be aware of some of the great things that we used to have in our downtown and that we've lost over time. So this, of course, is a pretty current view of the downtown business village. This is right at the intersection of Newton Street and Main Street. To the left is the Lammy Insurance Building that's got the insurance and the florist in there. So I think folks know what we're looking at there. And that site just to the right at the corner is Peter Bemis's property. So that's one of the existing properties that I think is, a bit of a blank canvas for the town. That's what it used to look like in the 1930s. So obviously a lot of things have changed. You had the existing gas station on the right-hand side at the Bemis lot, and the property at the left-hand side, that corner building, which is still there, was at that time a drugstore and a soda fountain. And you can see that there were, other businesses in that area, but it just kind of, I thought, gives a really interesting perspective about sort of what has happened to our downtown. And you look at then, and back then and now, and it just tells a story, right? This is that corner property with the insurance, with Lammy Insurance and the florist, and I believe Ginny Martin still has her realtor's office there as well. What's fascinating about this building is how much has been lost over time, and some of what used to be some really interesting and historical architectural detail that's been lost at the property over time. And I know I'm sounding to some degree like this is a presentation from the Historical Commission, and in some ways it is, but again, I think it speaks to the vision of what we're trying to recapture in our downtown, because that's what that building used to look like. That huge window in the middle that really provided a lot of definition to the building is now gone. The two archways, those door archways, those are gone. That really interesting bay window on the right-hand side has also been lost over time, and some of the detail of the entranceway. So we went from a building like that was, the drugstore and soda fountain, a real kind of community gathering place in a lot of ways. And this is sort of what it's become over time, which is not, and none of this is meant to put down any of the existing buildings or the schools or anything like that, but rather to tell the story in kind of little pieces of what's happened to our downtown over time. This is our existing fire station. I know it's that's going away at some point, but this is what used to be there. This was the old Peters High School. Excuse me. So that amazing structure is what we used to have at that location. And you think about if that building was still there, what amazing possibilities you would have for kind of a historic adaptive reuse of that structure, whether it's really great. I would live there. I mean, those would be amazing condominiums or apartments. If you had them there, you could have restaurants, you could have businesses, or you could have a combination of that. But what a great sort of architectural and historical resource in our downtown that, again, added to the fabric of our downtown that we just don't have anymore. This is 11 Main Street. This is where the Santander is, and a number of other businesses, also the We Care daycare school. And that's what it used to be. This is the old Southborough Arms, and I had sort of heard stories of the old Southborough Arms and that what a sort of amazing structure it was, but I hadn't seen pictures of it until we sort of got into this downtown initiative. More pictures of it. What jumps out at me on this is obviously you've got just the amazing structure, this Victorian architecture that we've sort of lost in place of, kind of this 60s, plaza feel. But the sort of advertisement and the spirit of what this business was, right? On the way to the mountains and beaches of New England, people used to come to Southborough and stop and stay at this amazing place. It had a Piazza Cafe. A Piazza Cafe in Southborough, doesn't that sound awesome? But that's something that we've sort of lost over time, and wouldn't it be great to get something like that back in our downtown? Just another view of the Southborough Arms on your left-hand side and what, Main Street used to look like many years ago. And that's kind of what it looks like today. These next couple of slides are pictures of some other buildings that have been lost. These are a handful of residential and business properties that are right off of the town common that were taken over by the Fay School and ultimately demolished. I'm going to show another one involving St. Mark's School. Again, I want to emphasize, this is not to put down either one of those institutions or any of the existing businesses or residences that we have in the downtown, but simply to point out, and particularly with the schools, I think they provide some of the best backdrops to our downtown that we could really ask for. So they're an asset to our downtown, and I wouldn't take it any other way. But these are examples of a couple of other, really attractive historical structures that we've lost in our downtown over time. This was the corner of Main Street and Corderville Road. That with the mansard roof and the that three-story farmhouse with the farm in the back. That's now St. Mark's School. Again, the meadow is wonderful. I love it. But just, you sort of take all these together and you can see some of the structures, the historical significance, and with that, a lot of the vitality that we've lost in our downtown. And this is my last one, and then I'll start to wrap it up. This is the Southborough train station. Another really interesting structure that, if it were still around, would make a great restaurant. But we had all of these things. We had the Peters High School. We had the train station. We had the post office, which I didn't show a picture of there. The drugstore and soda fountain at the Newton Street corner, the Southborough Arms, all of these sort of community gathering places that added to the fabric of our downtown that we have sort of lost over time. And that's really the spirit of this exercise from my perspective and from the Economic Development Committee's perspective, and why we think it's so important. Before we sort of lose anything more, we can really begin to add back into the fabric of our downtown these kinds of gathering places that really used to draw our community together. So that's the spirit in which we are undertaking this project. I don't think that we anticipate that we're going to rebuild the Southborough Arms. But on the other hand, that's the kind of again, the spirit of what we're trying to bring back to our downtown. And what we're looking to do. And so, again, thank you for, kind of keeping this on the radar. And if I could ask anything of the board tonight, it would just be that we continue to kind of keep this as a community-wide priority. Like I said, we're taking our show on the road, and we're going to be bringing this to other boards and committees, trying to build a consensus for this project. But we're pretty confident that zoning is going to have to be a piece of this, and likely wastewater too. But this is kind of the image of what we're trying to accomplish. So happy to answer any questions, and thank you again for the time.
Yep, thanks for coming. And I know Julie had reached out to indicate to us that she's hoping that we can have regular updates, regular communications between us. I know when we met about a month ago, I think collaboration was one of the key words that came out of that meeting that we had. And
Absolutely.
that it's, you know, it's not just the EDC driving this, it's really everybody working together on that. And it's good that you're reaching out and involving everybody and as many different groups and committees and boards as you can. And, you know, look forward to continued meetings and updates and communications with you on the process and helping any way that we can.
Great.
Well,
Thank you very much.
okay, Mr. Kalenda.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. It was excellent. Are you, so the level of collaboration, are you getting the support, or at least the interest in knowing more from various boards and committees?
I think so, and I think the interest is kind of growing and growing. But what really, in my view, kind of promotes that from a political standpoint is the continued involvement of the selectmen, which is why I think this is so wonderful that you're keeping this on your radar, and I thank you for it.
And I do think, I agree, Mr. Shea, I think this should be something that we should have on our agendas, maybe once a month, just a quick update of where this goes, where it is, where it's going. I think this board has historically been quite supportive of the work that the EDC is doing. They volunteer a heck of a lot of time to put things like this together and to create an awareness of what that downtown could look like. I've spoken with so many of the business owners downtown who have repeatedly said that it's just withering away. They don't get the traffic that they used to get. You know, there's, you know, the level of business continues to drop. That's not good for our businesses. That's not good for our residents who would like to you know, go to some of those places. So great work. One question I do have, so I see, you know, so let's play this out. So if the EDC does all this work and comes up with options, boards and committees are on board, maybe some zoning gets done, you need someone to build it. You need someone to take that first step of saying, yes, I want to do that in downtown. I'm going to invest the money and the time and the energy. I'm going to go in front of those boards and committees and, you know, plannings. Who knows what's going to happen there? Has anyone come forward to say to you, I've got $20 million I'm looking to invest in the downtown of Southborough?
I have not gotten the $20 million offer yet, Mr. Kalenda, but I think what we're doing right now is setting the stage for really kind of the next big phase of what an economic development organization does. So really what you're putting in place here is the tools and the opportunity for someone to come in and make that kind of a commitment. And, you know, zoning, I mean, I don't think folks recognize enough how important your zoning is, not only from a regulatory standpoint, but through your zoning, you are advertising to those folks the values of your town. And so if your zoning doesn't reflect the kinds of projects that you're looking to attract to your town, you're already starting, you know, 4 steps behind, because you know, sometimes your developers aren't necessarily familiar with the town, and so they might not know what the town really values and what's really possible. If they were to really kind of advance a project like this, somebody might be sitting in an office in Boston, leafing through the zoning bylaw and coming to the conclusion that, oh wow, you know, that particular site is a great site, but I've looked at the zoning bylaw and you can't do any of the stuff that we want to do. So I think that's an important piece of the exercise. The next step from an economic development perspective, once you sort of get those things in place, is the recruitment exercise. And that's where you're going, you know, you can do this one of 2 ways. You can put the zoning in place and you can try and align the stars from an infrastructure standpoint to get the kinds of things that you want. Where it really gets fun is where you're going out and you're selling that, and you're trying to bring in developers for a particular project. or for a particular site based on the zoning that you have and based on the renderings and based on the kind of, being able to present to a developer that we think this has a lot of community support based on the exercise that we've gone through. So the short answer is no, not yet, but that's part of the process.
And what are you hearing, Mr. McKay, from our local businesses, many small businesses who are also residents in our town? What are you hearing from them on this?
I'm hearing the
initiative?
same exact thing that you are, which is, and that's part of the reason why I went through this exercise, because it's not any one building, it's not any one project, it's these sort of series of little decisions that have been made over time, sometimes by the town, sometimes by others, that have really kind of undermined the fabric of our downtown. And so we used to have, some really interesting, attractive gathering places for our community that now no longer exist. And that's true from, Southborough Arms as an example, the old soda fountain and drugstore, the train station. You don't have folks sort of commuting or, getting on and off at the train station to bring them downtown. Another example is the post office, and I've certainly heard that from a number of businesses. So if we're gonna be successful at supporting the existing businesses that we have downtown, we need to help kind of rebuild that fabric a little bit. And so and I think folks want that, some vitality downtown.
Well said. Thank you, Mr. McKay.
Brascio.
Thank you, welcome, thank you for the presentation.
you.
I'm sorry that I missed.
Oh, no worries.
The one that you had. Just a couple follow-up questions based on what you presented tonight. You had spoke about wastewater treatment and the grant and the importance of that. Do you have somewhere that you envision at this point that going? I mean, it's kind of hard to do a feasibility study if there's no land to do it, or you don't have an idea of where you may want to do it. And maybe that answer comes after you go to Weston and see how small of an area or how large of an area their whatever it was you said.
Hydroponic.
Thank you. I am not a storage person, but, maybe that will give you some additional insight. If you could just touch on that briefly.
Yeah, the short answer is we're gathering information at this point. We have not gotten to the point that either one, it's feasible or we should do it, or how do you size it? So no, there's no educated answer on that yet. We're still working on that.
I like the simple answers. That's good. As far as the initiative, how much are you taking into, I know the Historical Commission has worked on getting the historic district. Kate Mattson was very instrumental in that. How does that play in with the initiative that you're looking to do? Because there are so many historic homes downtown, and you talked about preservation.
Mm-hmm.
So in preserving those homes, as well as trying to bring a different atmosphere to downtown, just if you could speak to that and how the historic district may or may not play into your vision for downtown.
So I think there's fairly wide community support for preserving the existing historical homes downtown. I've not heard any groundswell to change that, and I think what I've heard from a number of the folks who live downtown and live in the surrounding area is how important it is to them to preserve that. So I think the end product of the initiative will be to support that as much as possible.
I think that's important.
Yeah, I do too. Because I mean, you want to add to the vitality of your downtown, but I don't think you want to take away from the historical character. We've lost enough of the historical character already, which, a lot of these structures would be, economic development gold mines now. And I don't mean that I shouldn't use the word gold mine, but I mean, they would provide great community development opportunities to do things like, mixed use at the old high school.
You're right.
Right, and so that's the spirit within which I think it's really important to maintain those structures. At the same time, I think it's important to be open to the possibility of things like the Burnett House, right? I mean, there's an example of a what was a residential structure that is gonna be used for a business use, a bed and breakfast. You know, I mean, it's a business use, you almost hesitate to call it that, because it's residential in nature, but, you know, I think that once that's done, I drive by it every day, on my way to work, and I mean, what a great opportunity for our community, and how wonderful it is that we were able to find a pathway to make that happen. And so I think that's kind of the spirit within which we need to approach the historical homes and structures downtown.
Okay, and then I would imagine with your initiative, you're taking into account with the ULI, all of the reporting you got back on that and the recommendations on that. I know that it was a great meeting at St. Mark's, and a lot of positive feedback came out of a lot of different sources that were invited to come. So I would just imagine that you're kind of putting things in line with that in the master plan as well within your initiative?
Yes.
Okay. And lastly.
Can I mention one other
Absolutely.
thing, just because you mentioned the Historical Commission? I need to give a photo credit, because I stole all of their, or many of their photographs from their website, and I think that's really, again, an important asset to the community, and thank God that they've preserved at least the
There's some
memory
great
of many of
pictures.
these
They're
things.
phenomenal.
Yes.
It is. It's a great testament. And then lastly, with the construction that's going on at Main Street, I know it's kind of a tough time to try to do an initiative when you want to focus on trying to how to bring businesses in, what we need to do when we're looking at a 2-year project with Main Street being kind of torn up. So if you could just kind of speak to, again, vision. I know there's no concrete plans. That's why you're starting this exercise. I understand that. But I imagine once Main Street's done, it would be easier to draw potentially new businesses in. What are you doing proactive while Main Street is going on to bring new businesses? I believe Santander has left the 11 Main Street building, so there's a vacancy there. So while we're talking about downtown and
Yes.
bringing businesses in, if you could just speak to what EDC is doing to maybe fill some of these vacancies, the CAS building, along Route 9 as well.
Sure. So we review the available vacancies constantly. And we always have our ears to the ground. I just had breakfast with one of our local brokers with kind of that idea in mind of trying to keep an eye on the vacancies. Because I think they're pretty, we were doing regular broker breakfasts. And I think we'll be moving towards probably an annual event type process. But we're talking to those folks all the time, trying to keep our ears to the ground of opportunities to fill those spots. Admittedly, it's, particularly selling downtown right now, it's tough. And I think for us, I think we have focused more in terms of our, how are we sort of conceptualizing this downtown initiative over the course of the next 2 years while this is going on as 3 things. The zoning piece, trying to get a handle on wastewater, whether it makes sense to try and do anything collectively. And the third piece that we've talked about is really trying to invigorate and support a kind of downtown merchants association, because we got to keep the folks who are down there alive and in business while all this construction is going on, which is a legitimate fear for them and something that we definitely want to support. So I think the candid answer to your question is, in terms of active recruitment for projects downtown, we've not really been engaged in that. We're focusing on those other 3 elements right now.
Okay, and then just one last question. You mentioned a group of different boards and committees you've spoken to. You mentioned trails. You didn't mention open space. Have you spoken to them as well? I know it's more than just land. It's opportunities. They
Yep.
work with trails and recreation, and I just want to make sure that we're not missing a connection that we might want to make sure it's an inclusive process.
They're
That's all.
definitely on the list.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
Mr. Stivers.
Thanks, good presentation. As you know, I've been following this for a while, and a lot of good ideas here. A couple of things. One, to Ms. Braccio's point, the Weston hydroponic plant has got a 40 by 70 foot footprint for 7,000 gallons a day capacity. And that actually supports somewhere between 20 and 30 homes and businesses in the central Weston area. So technology has actually improved dramatically. I think that didn't work very well initially when they put it in 7 or 8 years ago, but rumor has it that it's working, and I guess that you guys are going to take a look at it. So I think that another good avenue for support for this is staying connected to the Master Plan Committee. And I know Kathy Bartolini is involved in that. That committee has a large number of members, nearly a couple dozen, I guess, which is in one sense administratively a little cumbersome. On the other hand, I think that creates an avenue into a variety of town boards and committees that if that message can get translated through that structure, goes back into a lot of places that I think are going to be important to coordinate and get folks collaborating around through this process. So I see that not only as a way to sort of crystallize the vision a little bit, but also then to reinforce implementation support. So I would encourage you folks to stay close to that as well. Thanks.
Fair point. I should have mentioned that the list of other boards and committees that I mentioned was not an exhaustive one at this time.
Yep.
We're just picking them off one at a time, but those are definitely two key boards and committees that I think are important to stay connected to.
Thanks.
Mr. Healy.
Very quick, Dave, you and I have spoken an awful lot about this. You know I enjoy talking about Main Street. It is going to look better. It is going to look better. Anyway, I mean, this is great stuff. I really think there's a tipping point. I mean, it really is sort of interesting just the last couple of weeks in Southborough with the Arts Council, with the events they had, with Youth and Family Services, with a number of things they're doing. I'm sure they're on your list as well of folks to touch base with. You know, what the Rotary Club did and the sort of energy you felt with the food trucks and the music. I mean, it's you know, it's almost close enough that you can taste it, and I'm not sure what the tipping point is, but it feels like you guys are very much moving in the right direction. So other than reporting to us, I mean, I think it's, at least from my perspective, obviously let us know. I mean, you know, we can be cheerleaders. You know, we can box ears if some committee that should be cooperating with you isn't. I mean, this is potentially great stuff, and I agree with you that you know, making the downtown area into something much more than it is right now is a worthy goal.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Appreciate the update.
thank you, folks.
Move to reports. Town Administrator's report. Ms. Hale.
Yes. Just wanted to remind the board of a couple of dates, and the public at home certainly. On July 15th, Representative Dykema will be at the library at 10 a.m. in the morning holding office hours, so it's a chance for folks to drop in and chat with her and her staff informally if they'd like to. And speaking of Southborough Youth and Family Services, they are in the midst of launching their summer concert series. So there are several dates over the course of June and July, and all that information is available on the town website, so we just want to help them publicize that. And that's it for now.
Okay. For chairman's reports, first, I just want to let the board know that we had received a check from the Fay School. We received it after the agenda had been posted. So the town is in receipt of that, and we'll have an item on our agenda for our next meeting to take a vote to officially accept that. But I just wanted to advise that we have that in hand, and we did receive that. Next, I was asked by Mr. Malinowski to provide an update on the public safety building. They had a meeting yesterday. Actually, the Public Safety Building Committee met last night, and they did approve a substantial completion extension date to August 13th from August 1st. That extension comes at no cost to the town. It will allow for the proper spacing on a few items to make sure that they get done right. They were able to reduce the contractor's request for extra money to cover general conditions for the time period from mid-July through the end of July by over $10,000. At the end, the combined result is one that they think is fair to all parties, but brings certainty to the substantial completion date. the goal of all is to make sure that the departments move in enough time so that they're settled in prior to the start of school, and that the August 13th date will support that. So everybody is on board now that that is the completion date. No further adjustments will be entertained, and they're going to be requesting a weekly schedule update so that that can be continually monitored between now and then. So that's the update from Jason. Members' reports? Ms. Braccio.
If I may, just a couple quick updates. I wanted to update the board and to thank everybody that the food drive that was done for the food pantry last week and a half ago Saturday was wonderful. Over 2,000 pounds were collected, so it's, once again, it's a testament to the generosity of the taxpayers in this town. And I would also like to extend a congratulations to the unofficial mayor of Southborough. Ms. Beginga was honored today as the unsung heroine from Southborough. She had a wonderful day. It was a wonderful event. Representative Dykema picked up her and Betty, took them in, and they also transported them back home. She had a wonderful time. She was extremely honored to be there for all of the wonderful things she's done and to represent the town. So congratulations to Miss B. Thank you.
We tweeted a photo of that a couple of hours
You
ago.
did?
so
Okay,
you can find
perfect.
it on the town's Twitter account.
Yeah, so congratulations to her. Thank you.
A hearty congratulations to B, and I believe you know something about that award, Ms.
I
Braccio,
do.
don't you? Yes.
Many years ago. Thank you.
Any other report, Mr.?
Yeah, I do.
Healy?
It was about 10 days ago or so, there was a wonderful get-together at the Historical Commission honoring, remembering Kate Madison. And it was, you know, you never know what to expect when you go to really any affair like that. And it really was kind of remarkable. Her husband gave a sort of amazing recounting of their journey from Australia to the United States, and then walked through Kate's involvement in Massachusetts and in Southborough. And they asked me to say a couple of things on behalf of the Board of Selectmen, and I did. And I'll just repeat some of that now for folks who weren't there. And that is, I mean, I encountered Kate with the Main Street project, and she made sure that from a historical perspective that we stayed on the straight and narrow. And what I said was, you know, I can point to various things in the Main Street project that have Kate's fingerprints on them. And there are tons of historical things throughout the town that people can do the same thing. And I just said that's a pretty remarkable legacy to have. So that's my report.
Well said.
Thank you. Mr. Stivers.
Yes, thanks. I'll second what Marty said about the Kate Madison event. I attended that as well. A remarkable woman and a huge list of accomplishments and contributions to the town. So it's rare to find somebody that skilled, dedicated, et cetera, and obviously her impact will last a long time. So a wonderful event. Couple of things. In the last couple of weeks, I've attended a couple of workshops for new selectmen, and one by the Division of Revenue, Bureau of Local Services on financial stuff. I've got some things I will follow up on with Mark and Brian about that. Another one, Mass Municipal Association put on a workshop for new selectmen. And a couple of interesting ideas that I will throw out here for consideration at some point down the road. One is that it turns out that there are a significant number of towns who are actually rethinking the label selectmen. And in fact, the Select Board appears to be a title that is now being adopted in a variety of places. I think Hopkinton just going through this, and a number of other places as well. So instead of the gender-specific, move toward gender-neutral, so Select Board member and Select Board seems to be an interesting concept, and I would suggest that we put that on a discussion topic at some point in the future. Second, there also is a possibility, I talked with people about streamlining the minutes process. It's my understanding that we can designate an individual member to approve our minutes. And so the way that works is that our secretary does minutes, distributes them to the members, and members provide comments back to the secretary, and one member sits down with the secretary and puts together the combined version and approves the minutes, which allegedly expedites the minute review process, and it simplifies the administrative thing. So, again, I don't know how much enthusiasm there is for that, but that's something that is legal to do, as I understand it, and maybe something we could talk about in the future as well. So, interesting to keep an eye open what's going on around other boards. The other interesting comment is that it's fascinating that you sort of get overwhelmed sometimes in terms of the issues that face us in an individual town. I can tell you that there are some very strange things going on out there in the world that I'm grateful we don't have to deal with. So the world is a strange place, and I'm pretty happy being in Southborough. So thank you.
And just to follow up on that, Ms. Hale and I were talking yesterday, and I think she's going to be reaching out very shortly on potential dates for a goal-setting event. So items that you had brought up, I think that would be the opportunity to
Great, thank you.
discuss those, just so we can discuss those together as a group.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to consent agenda. Again, we've addressed item A. For items B through G, are there any requested holds?
Nope.
So I will move items B through G. Approval of meeting minutes, June 4th. Approval of the fire CBA effective July 1. Accept municipal vulnerability preparedness program grant in the amount of $22,000 for Mass EEA. Approval of fiscal year 2019 year-end transfers. Chestnut Hill Farm one-day beer wine license applications for the dates as listed, and the common vic application for Zumi Pizza Company, 5 Turnpike Road.
Second.
Moved,
A
seconded.
discussion point? Second. I had offered the secretary a couple of typo corrections on the meeting minutes, nothing of any substance, but seems to me it's worth including those fixes.
And so you provided those to?
I had sent it back to the secretary, to Katie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have seen those
No, I have not.
changes.
Again, typos. Lou Palecki's name was misspelled and a
So-
verb was wrong.
So,
Like Scribner errors.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, minutes don't need to be verbatim of everything that happens and perfect, and, you know, they're a compilation of what generally took place so that residents who weren't here can understand what went on. So
Yep.
if there's something dramatic that we need to change, then let's talk about it. If not, I mean, if any of us, I guess, provide something that is so minuscule that it's not even needed, I don't know that we need to spend board time looking at that, but your call, Mr. Chairman.
No, and again, I'm sure that it is just minor typo things. I just think that my standard has always been, if there are comments, that I will funnel those through either Mr. Purple or Ms. Hale
Okay,
to distribute to the board as a whole, just so everybody sees the
Okay.
recommended changes. And again, maybe that's something we can talk about
happy,
further at a
happy to
at
do
a
so.
planning.
Yeah.
So, I'm just gonna recommend that, I guess, that we hold item B for now, just so we can redistribute
Okay,
the minutes as edited, just so everybody sees the final
sure, okay.
versions.
Let's not forget them.
Correct, so we'll make sure that that gets on to
For the
the
July
next
meeting.
agenda. All right, so I will then modify my motion to move items C through G.
Second.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Passes unanimously. Other matters properly before the board. Committee charges, status, dissolution, the Golf Course CR Committee. I requested that this be put on. We were probably inches away from the finish line on having the CR finalized. But again, there was one, I think, a reference to one of the attachments that just needs to get, that wording needs to get finalized with the lawyers. So it's my hope that we can approve tonight a 30-day extension for the Golf Course CR Committee to at least take them through the end of July. I fully expect that in our meeting in the middle of July, that we will have either the the CR executed by that time or available at that meeting for us to execute, but would like to extend that committee's charge for one more month.
So moved.
It's moved-
Second.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Lastly, board committee staff reappointments for fiscal year 2020. I will just note that similar to the last meeting, the 23B3 form that I had to submit last meeting was resubmitted for tonight because all the action was not completed. I think everybody has a hard copy printout of the latest and greatest version of the committee reappointments. And there's also, I will just note, internal staff reappointments. My understanding is these, the individuals and the staff internal reappointments were not sworn in
Correct.
within the 15-day
Correct.
time period. So these are people that we had made staff appointments to at a previous meeting, and because they have not been sworn in time, we again need to reappoint them to start that 15-day clock again for those individuals.
Any reason why the clock has to be at 15 days, Mr. Chairman?
That's the way things are. That's,
Who has the authority to
it
adjust
is
the
a town,
clock?
it was a,
It was set by bylaw, I think.
yeah, it was a town bylaw that was set. I forget what it was previously, and
Maybe,
there
as
there
part
was-
of our goal-setting discussion, one of our goals could be
I know that,
bringing this up at the
I
next
know that
annual
this has
town meeting.
been
Extend.
discussed, because just given the time of year, more often than not, it runs into the 4th of July holiday and vacation.
Any town
time
volunteer should
periods.
know not to take a vacation during the summer. They may have to get reappointed.
So, other than that, are there questions, comments on the appointments as presented? Again, I think I started to say this, didn't finish, but the list before us has been modified slightly from that which was posted in our packet, just to indicate responses that have come into Lori since the date that the packet was posted. There are no new appointments on here. The only appointments we have already dealt with under the scheduled appointments earlier tonight, so there may be a couple of other reappointments for responses that have been received recently.
Are we reaching out to the no responses here, and they
We
just haven't
continue to.
responded?
We
Yes.
continue to,
Okay.
yes.
A little surprising that people aren't getting back, but
So Chairman, I think, so Ms. Gillespie was asked to join us.
Ms. Gillespie has sent correspondence to us indicating that she is resigning from CPC. So she is not seeking or she is not on this updated list for reappointment to the CPC as the open space representative.
Okay.
So that will still remain a vacancy to that group.
To move the discussion, I'm happy to suggest that we approve reappointment of all those in green, save historical for now. And we'll have that, I'd like to do that one second.
Motion's made, is there a second? Or is there another question?
So everybody in green
except historical.
historical.
Correct, on both pages.
that.
Moved, seconded, any discussion on that?
Nope.
All those in favor of supporting reappointment of all those in green, with the exception of Historical Commission for now?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Mr. Kalenda.
My only comment on historical, I do, and as I stated last time, I know and respect both individuals. I had hoped that they would have been able to assuage my concerns that I had voiced last time. They're not here, and having not been able to do that, I will, just wanted to state I will not be able to support the nominations at this time, but if someone else obviously wants to make a motion, but I will not be able to support.
Yes. So again, we had reached out to both Ms. Battles and Mr. Hubley. Unfortunately, both were unable to attend this evening. Is there a motion?
I guess I'll move to reappoint Mr. Hubley and Ms. Battles. Have a second for discussion.
Moved and seconded. Any
As I
discussion?
stated last time, I think that, I guess Mr. Healy and I were not involved in the process that surrounded the Historical Commission a year or so ago, whatever. And I think that what I've tried to do is, as Mr. Healy suggested, is sort of step back and sort of take some of the emotion out of that. And I think that as I've observed Ms. Battles and Mr. Hubley over the last year plus on the Historical Commission, I think they're capable and doing good work there. And I guess I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that says that they obviously were part of that experience that was a fairly emotional one for all parties. And I think that I'm convinced that they learned something from it and will work hard to avoid that same kind of circumstance in the future. And it's hard to get qualified volunteers to do these jobs. I think they do a good job, and so I'm willing to support them for reappointment.
Ms. Braccio.
Thank you. I also had questions for historical. My questions weren't based on emotion. I had very specific questions I wanted to have answered, and I have had the opportunity to speak to the members of historical. My questions have been answered. I have a level of confidence in what they have relayed to me about going forward, so I would support their reappointment. Thank you.
Any other comments? Questions? Motion was moved, seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes 4-1. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Yeah.